Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 115th episode of the Writ Podcast. Things have changed quite a bit over the last 12 months. At the beginning of the year, the Conservatives and the Liberals were more or less deadlocked in the polls, and now we look like we're heading towards a Conservative majority. And in Ontario, we have a new leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, so we'll chat about what impact that's going to have on politics in the province. So I've reconvened my panel of seasoned political pollsters. Dan Arnold is Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara and worked as Director of Research and Advertising in the Prime Minister's office and polled for the Trudeau Liberals in each of the last three elections. Andrew Enns is Executive Vice President at Léger, polled for the Federal Conservatives during the Harper years, and has polled for provincial Conservative parties across Canada. And James Valkey is Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints Research and has worked on many central campaigns for the NDP. The three of you, I'm really happy to have you back at the end of the year. We're going to close it out in style. Thanks so much for joining me.
A pleasure.
Great to be here.
Happy to be here.
So what we're going to do, I think we're going to look at each of the parties in turn, kind of look at how this year is ending for them, kind of look back a little bit on what we've learned, I guess, over the last 12 months, and especially over the last few months since we last chatted. We'll start with the party that's leading in the polls, the Conservatives. Latest numbers usually are putting them anywhere 40 to 42% sometimes. Leads in Ontario, big lead in Atlantic Canada now, BC, the Prairies, even in Quebec showing a little bit of life. Andrew, is what Pierre Poilievre has built in terms of the polls, in terms of his support, is that fragile, or do you think that is stable, that can stick around?
I think, I thought to myself earlier in the year, when we started to see sort of the breakaway 5, 6, 7 point leads in May, that there was still some uncertainty around that. I think, though, the consistency of the polling numbers, throughout virtually, since the spring, I think there is a bit of stability with these numbers. I think there's room to sort of some fluctuation, a point here or there, but he has developed. He got on this message track back in 2022, and for the longest time, he sounded a bit like a stock record, didn't seem to be doing much, but there's something to be said with the discipline and the consistency of message, and he was onto something. And I think it took the Liberals were a little bit slow to respond, and it's challenging now. And I think when I looked at Minister Freeland's economic statement that she tabled a few weeks back. There's not a lot of good economic news in there. I think it's going to be a fairly, I don't think things are going to get worse, but I don't think things get demonstrably better either. So I still think that there's going to be room for Poilievre's approach. He'll have to refresh things and probably update things, but I think there'll still be room for the talk economy, and there'll be an audience willing to listen to what he's got to say.
Dan, is the numbers for Poilievre, are they sticky? Are there vulnerabilities there for him?
Yeah, ultimately, a lot of the supporters, people who haven't voted Conservative before, a lot of it is younger voters who tend to drift back and forth and aren't as entrenched in their voting patterns, who maybe have other issue sets that they might not be as aligned with the Conservatives on. They may love what he's talking about for housing and cost of living, but if they start thinking about other issues or other things can move to the forefront, that could be a bit of a surprise for them when they find out, oh, hey, this guy's not that great on environment or whatever identity issue I'm focused on right now. So I think there's always a risk there. I think to his credit, like Poilievre is doing the right things. He's focused on the issues that are working for him and has been for quite some time. His team is innovating. They put out the 15-minute housing video, which is, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but they're trying new things, which is right, what you want to do when you're in opposition a couple years before an election. And, I think if they can stay focused, they're obviously in a very good position. I do think there's a tendency when you're up by a lot in the polls to get a little cocky at times. And, even last week, there was a bit of that kind of like, journalist asks a question he doesn't like, and that kind of inner Poilievre comes out there and picking a fight there. And even the Ukraine thing kind of feels like something that they may not have been as willing to give a bone to their base or whatever it was as they would have been had they been tied in the polls. So I do think there's a bit of a risk that you start assuming that you've got the next election won and starting to think about kind of how do we want to change the country as opposed to how do we want to win the election. And I think that's, could trip you up along the way, but it's not a bad problem to have, obviously. And they are still doing a lot of things right. They just every now and then he does drift off into this sort of like conspiracy theory, the media is against me land that has a tendency to trip him up a little bit.
15-minute videos on YouTube. Not a problem if you're watching this on YouTube. Strap yourself in. It'll be longer than 15 minutes. James, do you think that this is largely about what the Conservatives have done over the last little while, or what the Liberals haven't done or have done to do this to themselves?
I think it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. And 15-minute videos are intensive development exercises to look flashy, but I think what we should be focusing on is that 30-second ad. That nice, soft, warm, fuzzy ad that they put 6, maybe 7 figures behind buying that space, getting that ad out. The Liberals have ceded the territory to define who Pierre Poilievre is entirely to the Conservatives. They've done nothing real of substance. Like, earned media is fine, getting in the news is fine, but unless you're putting money behind it, you are not defining who that person is. And Pierre and the Conservatives, on a flotilla of cash, have produced a nice high glossy ad, and they have moved numbers. They have moved units. They have put that out there in front of people, and the result has been people now have a different perception or a perception of who Pierre Poilievre is, and they're turning red voters blue. And then the only other thing I'll say, and echoing Dan's point, is, if that's the message you're putting out there to the public, you have to be very careful about putting a different message out where you're prickly, where you're whiny, where you're crying about the gallery being mean to you or not liking the questions, because that is a very different brand than the brand that you have sold Canadians. I think for them in the long term is that, you said at the beginning, we're at a Conservative majority government. Well, we've got 2 years to go. And to stay at that peak for 2 years is a really, really high bar. And that's going to be a tough strategy for them when at a certain point in time, it ebbs inevitably. So they've got a lot of path ahead of them, but they're burning hot right now.
Andrew, it's a weird thing to ask, because obviously if you're at 42%, that's where you want to be. That's great. But, your experience with when you would be polling during the Harper years, it was all about incrementalism and squeezing out this last little bit of vote in this part of the country. And, it wasn't about building this national coalition of voters. They almost managed 40% in 2011. But do the Conservatives know how to handle these kinds of numbers? Because they really haven't seen them since the 80s.
Well, look, from looking at the past year, I think there's a team there that appreciates, what the public opinion trends are. They're doing their research. They've tapped into some messaging. So I think, I don't think they're sitting there going, holy crap, what just happened? What do we do with this? This was deliberate. They got here. I think they're going to be taking some hard looks as they think to next year in terms of how do we keep this going? How do we consolidate? And to James's point, I mean, some of what they've been doing in terms of their advertising and those ads are trying to consolidate this. They do, look, it moved fast, and they want to make sure that to use the phrase you use, that there is some stickiness to this, and so they'll be working hard to consolidate. They're going to look hard at some of those ridings that they're now obviously are in play for them, and you can be rest assured that there's an on-the-ground team that's looking at candidates in some of those areas to put some good people in place. And I think you might see them look to, say, broaden that message of the pocketbook affordability and just start to inch into the broader economic message, because I do think that the economy is going to be sluggish next year. I mean, that's according to Minister Freeland, and I think that's an opportunity again for the Conservatives to venture out into territory that's still very comfortable. And it's a bit of a different message. I'd argue in some respects a little more prime ministerial, in the sense of, like a broader message for the country. Wouldn't be a stretch. Still not straying from some of those pocketbook things, but and that'll help them keep this conversation a bit more, still fresh, and keep him still in the mind of the voters.
I want to move to the Liberals now. So I don't think they began the year thinking that this is where they would end it, in the mid-20s and closer to the NDP than to the Conservatives. Dan, if when you used to do your presentations about the polling situation landscape. What would you say now if you were presenting on where things are for the Liberals as they look ahead to the next year?
Yeah, I say it's not going great. Um, and I think the Liberals have to be aware of the situation they're in. You know, the risk you always get is that you get into these situations, you say, well, it's going to turn around, and you sort of like talk yourself into a bit of a bunker mentality. And I think the Liberals have to be aware of just how bad the situation is right now. They do need to recognize, though, that things can change, and there's a lot of time to make things change. But, ultimately, I think the biggest thing for them at this point is diagnosing what the problem is, and then from there you can get a solution. I think my view is increasingly that the biggest problem is the economic situation right now, and a lot of that is outside their control. But I mean, at Pollara we track. We have a rage index, and we measure how angry people are, and it's been going up over the last year. And I think it's just a very grumpy electorate out there, specifically on economic issues. And I think the thing that really is starting to that caused this downward shift in the summer was, I think, the interest rate hikes. I'm increasingly of that view. This isn't a case where the Liberals have lost 1 point every 2 months since the last election campaign. They were kind of hobbling along with the Conservatives, and then come June, July, the dam burst, the bottom fell out, whatever metaphor you want to use. Things just got bad really quickly there. And I've seen some polling recently, even on the most recent rate index that we did. People who have a mortgage and are still paying it down are twice as angry about their economic situation as homeowners who have paid down their mortgage. And they're also angry towards government. And some of that is age. Older people have paid down their mortgage. But I mean, even if you control for age, people who still have a mortgage are feeling a lot grumpier. I threw that demo on another horse race poll that we were doing for a private sector client, so we didn't put it out publicly. But the Liberal support was 15 points higher among homeowners who had paid down their mortgage than homeowners who had not paid down their mortgage yet. And I do think this vice on people's wallets, every time one Canadian goes to renew their mortgage and just finds out they've got $300 less a month than they did before, that is just a huge chunk out of your bottom line. And I think that's a big problem. And it's not an easy one to solve because short of firing the Bank of Canada governor, which is already Poilievre's turf, it's kind of outside of the government's hands for the most part. But I do think, the housing pressures that have built up with these mortgage hikes are what is causing a lot of the problems right now. And, as a result of that, they've got to find ways to at least make things easier for people who are going through that situation with mortgage renewals. Those are expensive solutions and difficult solutions, but I do think that's probably what they need to tackle in the short term.
So maybe they just need to pay everybody's mortgage. National Mortgage Payoff Program.
I mean, CMHC said there's close to $1 trillion of new mortgage renewals in the next 18 months. It's a lot of money out there that's floating around.
James, obviously from your perspective, looking at from the left towards the center, do you think that the Liberals need to try to get back that vote, that progressive vote, or do they have to try to get some of the votes that they've lost to Poilievre? What do you think would be the path that works for them right now?
I mean, if you look at the publicly available polls, New Democrats have been flat right across the board, 18 to 22%, right in that range. They're not benefiting as of yet directly to the numbers that the Conservatives are of the Liberals' decline. I do think you said firing the governor of the Bank of Canada. I think that they are in a desperation point that might be one of their options. They have a problem. I do focus groups for the most anodyne topics, really, really basic stuff. And as soon as the word Justin Trudeau comes up, people lean in a little bit more and they get a little bit more animated, and his brand is becoming a real problem for the Red Team's brand. I don't know what that means, but I do know that he is becoming more and more and more of a lightning rod. I'm seeing it in people's faces. They're becoming more animated. I don't know what that means going forward, but I do think that when we look at, they didn't think they would be here. And I think that they're going to be going into this holidays. I think there'll be a lot of quiet reflection. There sure shall better be. About how they change their strategy. But the one thing that's worked for them thus far is that the caucus has been behind him. They've been quiet. They've been lockstep. And we'll see if that varies or if that changes. I mean, there's always the adage, you dance with the one that brung ya. And a lot of them owe their political careers to Justin Trudeau's ascent in 2015. And the question becomes is, how much do you follow this? And then, having said all of that, 2 years is a very long time. Everything can change in 18 months from now, 12 months from now, right? It could be a completely different situation. So we're a bit off from an election, but I think things are going to be boiling under the surface for the Liberals, and they're going to have a hard time keeping a lid on it.
Andrew, what would be your view on it? Do these numbers kind of point to an end of reign kind of thing, or is there some way back?
Well, I think for the Prime Minister's numbers, I mean, he was, and it's sort of not, maybe not that surprising, but he was such a charismatic, defining individual in 2014 when he came onto the scene. And, and people just saw this unique progressive like beacon. And look, I did focus groups and we tested just about everything we could to come at him. And it just wasn't really much he could do. Not much he could. The population was ready for this fresh new. But if you look at his approvals, his runway was pretty short at the end of the day. Like even 2019, he started to take on, it wasn't 50-50, but there was already, some significant negative sort of building, and it's just continued. And I don't think those are necessarily going to change. I think the party's fortunes could change. The issue set could change, and then that's a different dynamic in terms of how how the party responds. I mean, it's interesting. I was looking at this. I was thinking about this. The last time the Liberals had sort of a leadership real question was, back in the Chrétien Martin days. But back then, that was a desire to change the kind of refresh the Liberal Party. There was no threat of defeat. Like no one in the Liberal Party felt that the Liberals were at risk to lose to the Conservatives back in late 90s, early 2000s, or even the early 2000s. I mean, party had just merged. It was fast forward to 2023. You've got two camps, and it's about one fears that they're going down to defeat. If you're anywhere in Western Canada and you're a Liberal MP, you're basically hearing, "I will lose," because they hate the leader so much. But there's another camp, and I would argue, Dan, I'll put you sort of towards this camp that's of a view very wisely going. Tories have deep sixed any new leaders the Liberals have come up with. Trudeau's a great campaigner. He's still got some good bona fides, and if we change leaders, we run the risk of a total wipeout potentially. So it's a really interesting, and I don't know what it's driven by this electoral fear, like that's the pending doom here in this case, but I don't know where it lands, quite frankly. I don't see anybody actively organizing, and so I think this decision really rests strictly with one guy, the PM. Like he will decide. I don't think there's really any, unless there's somebody organizing, has got Pollara on contract doing a bunch of polling for him. I don't see it. Like I think that he has the. To your point, James, you're correct. Absolutely, caucuses. We'll see. They've been pretty tight, and they've had lots of excuses to sort of go rogue, and they haven't. So,
well, then maybe from all of you, and Dan, you can go first. Does Trudeau need this? Like, should he stay or should he go? And I don't mean it in terms of what he will do, but is he the answer, or is he the solution, or is he the problem?
Yeah, so I don't think that would really solve the Liberals' problems right now to change a leader. If it is being driven by just an economic malaise out there, or frustration with what the government has done, and I think that's the case because we haven't seen the votes really move to the NDP. They've moved to the Conservatives, and people were just kind of happy with what the government was doing and the state of the country, but just didn't like the leader. they'd probably switch to the NDP because the NDP are the ones kind of co-signing everything the government's doing, and they've got a more popular leader. So then why not switch in that situation? I think the fact that people have moved to the Conservatives probably tells you it is kind of an economic frustration. People don't like the carbon tax. They don't like the way the economy is going. And I don't know if a new leader really would change that necessarily. So, I think the direction has to change, but I still think Trudeau is probably the best served to change that. A messy, protracted leadership battle, might not lead to a great outcome once the conservative torpedo, as Andrew said, of attack ads comes down the pipe at the next leader. So it's not a pleasant situation, obviously, for the Liberals to find themselves in, but there's a scenario where a new leader comes in and then the NDP gets the second place, and I think there's some risks there for sure.
James, do you have any different view on that?
Not much. I'll only add that someone had mentioned recent numbers reflective of Ignatieff type numbers before the 2011 campaign, and I would agree in some ways that the numbers are there. They represent as much, but we know when the writ drops, Justin Trudeau is one of the best players on the ice, right? He is a good campaigner. No one's going to argue that, and I think that's maybe something that is holding on to some folks behind the scenes as to what Dan said, who would the alternative be? And I think that's an unanswered question that probably keeps him in his spot right now.
Andrew, what do you think? Solution, problem?
Well, no, look, I agree with with Dan and James in the sense that if you change the leader, there's no guarantees you change the potential outcome. And then, quite frankly, the Liberals could be back with a leader, depending how the leadership went. If it was a tight leadership race, a 45-55 kind of result, and that new leader, presides over his first election, which is a bit of a wipeout, well, I think he's in trouble, or he or she's in trouble, and you might actually have a protracted, 2-year fight to hold on to power, much like Andrew Scheer's and Aaron O'Toole's. It's not a politics is kind of fickle. It's win or go home, and so in this case, you might be good to button down. It's hard nationally, but the leader doesn't have to be out every day. You can play back the leader a little bit, maybe take the edge off, and do what you can. And if there is a thumping, then you clean house, and it's a quicker way to start the rebuild if it does come to that.
Okay, let's go to the NDP. James, put you on the spot first. A few polls have put the NDP within a few points of the Liberals. Some polls have shown a bigger gap, the NDP not gaining as much. But for the New Democrats, is it worth a shot trying to take that second spot?
Yeah, I mean, when the CASA agreement was signed, every pundit in the face of the world said New Democrats are going to suffer, they're going to get annihilated, and it's been a year and a half, and that has not come to fruition. And now we're at a point where New Democrats need to see that they're within a margin of error range of the Liberals, and some polls that are coming out, some still adjust up, and they need to make a decision that they want to go really hard for those voters that are potentially up for grabs. If the voters in the GTA come to realize that the Liberal representation west of Toronto provincially is non-existent, New Democrats need to tell that story and take up that space and find a way to get out there. I think that they're triangulating right now. It is a challenging position where they are to be a strong opposition, while in agreement with some of the things that the government is doing and keeping them afloat. But they're in a position of authority as well, too, to a certain degree. Canadians have come to understand that New Democrats can be part of a stable government, and they need to find a way to emphasize those strengths in 2024 and find a way to hopefully, they're looking to leapfrog into the 25, 26, 27 range, and that would be... If they find those numbers sometime in 2024, I think they'll be feeling really good about themselves. What does that mean? I don't know.
If we end up soon enough, in a 23-21 scenario where the NDP is narrowly ahead and the polls start to settle in that, does the NDP start thinking, well, we're going to lose, this Poilievre's going to win anyway. We might as well try to beat the Liberals and pull the plug. Will the NDP get kind of,
my suspicion is New Democrats are very pragmatic. They are going to want to make sure they get some stuff done under the current situation before they pull a plug. What that means is it might give, if they end up going ahead a little bit in some of the polls, it gives them a little bit more leverage to try and pull some of those levers further, so that if and when the government falls in advance of the election, they can say, these are the things we got done and these are the things we didn't quite get done yet. So I think that they're still trying, like 2024 is going to be a big year for them, but the way we're ending 2023 is it's a juicy fruit hanging right there for them.
Dan, should the Liberals be worried that the NDP is going to pluck that fruit?
Yeah, I think if the NDP goes up in the polls, I can see Jagmeet Singh showing up at the PMO with his Versace bag wide open, just saying, like, pour the stuff in here for us. I want pharmacare, I want union rule, I want it all. So
it's gonna get measured drapes. That's the one. He'll be measuring his drapes. Yes.
So yeah, we'll see on that. I mean, in some respects, the NDP, like, they are sniffing at second place, but they're kind of Stephen Bradburying their way to second place. And this is an older reference, but I remember, like, when the Olympics many years ago, the Australian short track speed skater who won a gold medal because everybody ahead of him just fell down and he sort of, like, crossed the finish line, like, what just happened here? How did I win? And I mean, the NDP's not going for a gold medal; they're trying to go for a silver medal. But if the Liberals do keep kind of stumbling ahead of them, maybe they do get there. And I do think, I think the NDP has life better now in part of this agreement. Like, they actually get briefings from ministers. They're getting some results. They just passed some, for them, like, quite historic labor legislation. I think this is about as good as life has gotten for a lot of them in the last couple of years for the elected officials. And being across the aisle from a 200-seat Poilievre government may not be that appealing, certainly for Singh. Like, he's probably gone unless he makes big steps forward next election. So I think it probably becomes, as James said, more a question of leverage than wanting to actually pull the plug if they rise a bit more in the polls. Obviously, if they actually start moving ahead and getting into a good position, maybe that changes. But right now, it's like they're not going up. It's just the Liberals are going down. So if it's 21 or something in that range, I don't know if that's really incentive for the NDP to go forward, because there aren't a lot of new MPs coming in with those numbers. It's just a lot of new Conservative MPs that are coming in.
Andrew, of course, the Conservatives love when the NDP is doing really well. Well, not too well, I guess, but they do. They don't mind it when they're doing
not in Manitoba.
That's true. Federal New Democrats. Let's rephrase that. But what's your take on where the NDP is, the opportunities, the risks for them?
I'm gonna take a slightly different tact. I mean, look, polling numbers. Sure. Look, selfishly, Tories would love to see the NDP start to feel their oats and maybe feel more emboldened to say, hey, maybe we should test the waters and take second place. I think it's too often repeated to not be probably some truth to it, is that the NDP are struggling financially. They need to build their war chest. They're not that well organized. I think they need to, if I was Jagmeet Singh, I would put some attention to changing that narrative in the first part of 2024. I think that, if anything else, I think part of the problem is that I don't think the Liberals take them very seriously in terms of threatening to go to the polls, because I don't think they're ready to go to the polls. And I think that if they could change that a little bit, that might change and offer some leverage. So I think that would be my sense of what Singh. There's an opportunity. There's two elections in 2024 provincially. There's going to be a very good election for the NDP in British Columbia, which should be very good, for the party federally, which maybe they can spin off of later in the year. Obviously, I think it's October. James, you probably know better than I. There's also an election in Saskatchewan, which I think it's going to be a tougher election for them, but I think actually they're going to do quite well in Saskatchewan as well, in terms of they may not win that election, but I think they actually could make up some good ground. So those are some areas that potentially they can try to build, government in Manitoba. So I think that, I just think for Singh, he's done just about everything right in terms of he's got wins, he's got this, but as James said earlier, it hasn't actually landed with the public opinion. So take those wins and somehow build up your war chest and get people organized, build on what you've got in sort of a good election in Alberta and Manitoba, and prepare yourself to go to the polls and do well.
I'll add that there is a flavor in what's happening under the surface right now of 2011 pre-election. Like there's an unsettledness. There's a potential for the Liberals going down and New Democrats coming up. I'm not saying the results will be what 2011 was, but there's a feeling in the air somewhere out there that there's a shift. And I think it's safe to say we're in a space now where knowing what's going to happen 2 weeks from now has never been as unpredictable as it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the NDP is on the cusp.
James, it's going to be Christmas. I'm going to predict it's going to be Christmas. Come on.
Well, I don't know. They're voting on it lately in some legislatures to make sure it goes ahead. Anyway, but no, the NDP, probably won't be able to replicate what happened in Quebec. I don't think they're as well positioned for that. But that's the other factor we always kind of put aside. If the NDP decides to pull the plug, the Liberals do have the bloc, and from what we know from some reporting that's been done, the bloc does not seem to want to have an election anytime soon. Some of the polls are suggesting the Conservatives are starting to breathe down their neck a little bit, and so for the bloc, they might try to squeeze more out of the government over the next 2 years if the NDP decides to get a little bold. Let's close. We'll do one round just on the Ontario political scene because the Liberals have a new leader. We've seen one post leadership poll that suggested that it was helping the Liberals against the PCs. Dan, how is Bonnie Cromby going to help the Liberal Party?
Yeah, and I did some polling and data on her leadership campaign, so I'm a fan of hers. I think the struggle over the last couple of years in Ontario has been this battle for who is the progressive primary, right? Who's going to be the alternative to Ford? And Ford got the absolutely perfect split in the last election campaign. So the question will be, both the Liberals and NDP have new leaders. Will one of them be able to break free and actually present themselves as being the change candidate for voters who want change in the next election campaign? And I mean, Ford, his vote numbers are holding up okay, but his negatives are up. He's had some bumps. It'll be 8 years in power by the next election. So I do think there is an opening there for one of those opposition parties if they can break free and show themselves to be the change alternative for voters who want change. I think Crombie probably gives the Liberals the pole position there just by virtue of her name recognition. She gives them a bit of an anchor in Mississauga, which is obviously an important place to start. She's well liked among in both the delegates who voted and the broader public polling I've seen. She's well liked among older women, which is a key demographic that Ford has held but the federal Liberals do quite well with. So I think that's a growth potential area for her as well too. So I think that gives maybe her the inside track against Stiles there. But that's just you're starting the race a little bit ahead. If Stiles proves to be the better leader, that she could certainly take over there. There's a lot of ways to go until the next provincial election. So we'll see how she does, but I think at least she's seen as serious, she's seen as credible, she has experience, and she's shown she can raise money, which has been a big problem for the provincial Liberals recently. So I think that's it gives them a good starting point for that long race to the next election campaign.
James, is Bonnie Cromby good news, bad news for the NDP? Also, they had some bad news just a few days before when they lost the by-election in Kitchener Centre. So I don't know, were they... Did Crombie winning make them feel more sad or less sad after losing that by-election?
It's hard to say. I mean, one IVR does not a narrative make. It's going to be a little while to tease out what is going on in Ontario. And I'll say Ontario is a tough one. In the last provincial, it was, E- or 7 days before the election, and people still weren't quite fully engaged in what was happening in the election, right? It's accurate in the big numbers, and it's inaccurate in people's opinions and respective changes. And to that end, I mean, Kitchener-Waterloo, yes, certainly New Democrats lost that. They shouldn't have. But Mike Schreier, by all accounts, as a Green in Guelph, is well loved, and they dumped a lot of resources into it. Like, if ever there was an opportunity for the Greens to level up provincially, that was the opportunity, and they took it. New Democrats, they didn't help what went on down there, but it was heartening that they came in second, and I think they took a little bit more extra warmth knowing that the Liberals got 7% there, right? So it's a tough mix to dissect it all. But I think New Democrats and Liberals need to figure out what the opposition to Doug Ford looks like in that Toronto coalition, that GTA coalition, and who is going to fill the space as the next Premier of Ontario. Because I think that's what they'll be looking for. They won't be looking for the leader of the opposition. The loudest leader of the opposition does not win the election. They're looking for the next Premier of Ontario, and I think the opportunity's open.
Andrew, should the PCs be concerned?
Well, I think Dan hit it right on the head. I mean, I think obviously out of the three main candidates for the Ontario Liberals, Crombie, if there's a consolidation and if the Liberals are able to sort of, as Dan says, break free from that sort of neck and neck 25-24% that the two opposition parties currently hold, then certainly broadly, I think Crombie presents somewhat more of a challenge than, say, Nate Erskine-Smith or Yas, just in terms of politically. Those two, I think, were a bit more left on the leftern flank of the Liberal Party in terms of more sort of downtown urban sort of perspectives on things like addiction treatment and homeless situations. So that would have probably presented an easier contrast target. But Crombie's interesting. I mean, in some respects, she's more of the centrist Liberal. Mayor of Mississauga, you got to know there's going to be some good relationships with big developers. Can't be mayor of Mississauga and not have them. And so that, obviously, there's Ford's in trouble on that. I think, quite frankly, I think some of the NDP attacks on her might be interesting because there's some opens there, like her relationship with developers, taxation, for example, could potentially be something. She's the Tories, I've seen a couple comments. She's not, she's fairly wealthy. Has a certain lifestyle, so it'll be interesting. I think if she surfaces through all that and the Liberals are able to rise, I think it becomes a very very interesting match. And to Dan's point, you've got a government going for a third term, and that's a challenge right off the top. And I think Miss Crombie can actually, she could look premier-like for sure, but it's not automatic. I think that there's a real sort of next couple of years, and quite frankly, the Liberals have a big rebuild. Like don't underestimate, like two bad elections are tough to. It takes a while to build that back to just organizationally and operationally. So there's lots of work for her to do.
This is the last time we're going to chat before the end of the year, so I'll get a quick prediction from all three of you. You can say yes or no if you want. You can expound even more. But will there be a federal election in 2024? Who wants to go first?
I thought you and Philip were supposed to do the predictions. I didn't know we would sign up for that on this podcast here.
Yeah. No. While you're here, I'm holding you to it.
I think we've got some fun provincial elections to watch next year. New Brunswick too, in addition to the ones that Andrew mentioned. But I don't think there'll be a federal election now.
James?
No, there's too much skating room to adjust the agreement, deliver on different things, and expectations of when the next federal election should be, that I don't think 2024 is going to have a federal election.
Andrew?
Yeah, unless Jagmeet Singh can figure out to unlock some big donors, I think we're looking at spring of 2025. I mean, get a budget, and then that would be, to me, that's the most obvious next time.
Well, there's a perfect Christmas gift, Andrew. You can donate to Jagmeet and get him on the road to a federal election.
I already donated, and we have an NDP premier in Manitoba. What more do you want?
All right. Well, it's great to chat with you guys again. I wish you all a great holiday season, and we'll chat again in the new year. So thanks again for joining me.
Our pleasure.
For sure.
Merry Christmas.
Always enjoy it. Merry Christmas,
Merry
you guys.